All right. Hello, these are your water notes. So we're going to talk about water and pH. Let's get right to it. Um, Water has two hydrogens and one oxygen, right? You might remember that from middle school. I'm not going to go into protons and neutrons and electrons really in too much detail right now. You guys know that protons have a positive charge, so 8p means 8 protons. Neutrons have a neutral charge or no charge, so 8n means 8 neutrons. So right now we can just go ahead and tell that there are 8 protons and 8 neutrons in oxygen. That's this blue molecule here that I'm circling. The hydrogens are here in green, so they each have 1 proton. And these kind of red spheres with the negative charge are your electrons, right? And then atomic mass, again, if you remember atomic mass, that's if you added the protons and the neutrons together. So the atomic mass of oxygen would be 16, and the atomic mass of hydrogen would just be 1 each. All right, so water is commonly kind of drawn like this, and if you kind of tilt your head, it looks like a pair of Mickey Mouse ears. Like the protons are the ears, and the oxygen is like its face or its head. Um, and what we're going to talk about is how these are all connected. So what you're going to notice is that there are 2 electrons right here that are being shared by the hydrogen, and they're being shared by the oxygen. And the same thing down here. These hydrogens, or sorry, this hydrogen is sharing these electrons with this oxygen as well. And whenever 2 atoms share electrons, that's called a covalent bond, a covalent bond. Ionic bonds are when you just kind of give and take electrons. We're not going to have too many of those here in bio. Most of our bonds are going to be covalent bonds. So anytime you have atoms share a bond, those are going to be covalent. So actually let me bring this tool up. Again, these electrons are being shared, which means they are, oops, that should be a V. Oops, that should be the V. Sorry, I can't even spell covalent right. That's the L. Those are covalent bonds. So there's a bond right here, and there's a bond right here. All right. This covalent bond is a special type of covalent bond. It's called a polar. P-O-L-A-R, a polar covalent bond. What's that mean? It means that the oxygen is an electron hog. The oxygen has 8 protons, whereas the hydrogens only have 1 each. So if you imagine this as a tug of war, it's a tug of war between 2 protons for hydrogen and 8 protons for oxygen. So this 2 versus 8 tug of war is really unfair. And those 8 protons kind of win. So they pull these electrons closer to the oxygen. They pull them closer to the oxygen because the protons are going to attract those negative electrons. And they're going to spend, the electrons are actually going to spend a little more time around the oxygen as a result. That's going to make the oxygen slightly negative. Right? It makes the oxygen slightly negative, and because the electrons spend less time around the hydrogens become slightly positive. The hydrogens become slightly positive. This is what we call polar. Anytime you have part of your molecule being positive and part of your molecule being negative, that's the definition of a polar molecule, and that's going to get water most of its unique, or actually all of its unique properties. The fact that it is polar and that this oxygen atom is really, really, really going to hog all those electrons. And by the way, the fancy word for really, really liking electrons, you might remember this from 8th grade, is called electronegativity. So oxygen, we say, is really, really electronegative. All right. So what happens as a result? What happens as a result? So here's two water molecules. The oxygen's red, the hydrogens are white. This little Greek letter just means partial. So it's not a full positive and a full negative. It just means that this region, the hydrogen region, is slightly positive, right? Again, this hydrogen is slightly positive, and the oxygen here is slightly negative. And that's true for every water molecule, right? So what happens when you drop water molecules all next to each other like this? Well, what happens is you get something called hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding is between water molecules. It is between, not within the water molecule. Remember, these red lines that I'm drawing right here, those are covalent bonds. Those are between the hydrogens and the oxygens of the same molecule. But between different molecules, so between this water and between this water, that's where you have these hydrogen H bonds. H bond is an abbreviation for hydrogen. And just as you might expect, they involve hydrogen. So the partial positive of a hydrogen gets attracted to the partial negative of a different water's oxygen. And that's the bond right there in the middle, that dashed line that forms. That's a hydrogen bond. All right, so let's see how many hydrogen bonds we can actually make. So here's kind of the basic rule. By the way, hydrogen bonds are not very strong. Covalent bonds are stronger. But the rule of thumb here is that hydrogen can handle one hydrogen bond and oxygen can handle two. So basically, let's just go down here for a second. And if you want to pause this video and you want to try to figure out where the hydrogen bonds would be, now would be a good time. So here we go. Again, every hydrogen here has a positive charge, a very, very slight positive charge. It's a partial positive. And every oxygen here has a partial negative. I'm not going to draw all of them, but I am going to add some of them. And the hydrogens and the oxygens are going to be attracted. The positives and the negatives attract. So I'm going to draw this as like a little dashed line. So there's one hydrogen bond down here. I'm kind of down here in this left corner. Here's another hydrogen bond here. We can't put a hydrogen bond here because this hydrogen has already maxed out. It already has its one bond, so it's busy. But let's see, we can do this. We can put one here because oxygen can handle two. So now it has one and it has another one. Let's see, where else can we put one? We can put one here. We're not going to put one between the oxygens. They're not going to attract each other. It's kind of far away, but we can put one here. Again, the closer they are, the more likely they're going to bond. So I'm just going to add some hydrogen bonds here. Remember, oxygen can only handle two of them, and hydrogen can only handle one. So you're not going to have them everywhere. Some over here. This one right here that I'm doing now is a little far, but I'll put it anyway. But those are where all the hydrogen bonds could be. All right, so these are the properties of water that result as a consequence of those hydrogen bonds. The first is that water is cohesive. This is called cohesion. Water will stick to itself. Right? Water sticks to water, and that's because water is polar. Right? So anything that is also polar is going to want to attract to the oxygens and the hydrogens in water. This is why you have surface tension. The very top layer of water is kind of pulling downward on the upper layer of water molecules. I'm kind of down here in this middle picture. You have a net downward pull. Remember, there's no oxygens and hydrogens of water up above the surface, really, so you're only kind of pulling molecules down. Because they're all hydrogen bonding with the molecules underneath them. And that creates a nice kind of taut layer of water molecules right along the surface that we perceive as surface tension. And it can actually be strong enough to hold up light insects and other kind of light objects that don't have a lot of weight all at one point. This is also why if you dropped water like on a penny, it's not going to overflow immediately. It'll kind of bubble over. If this were a penny, the water would kind of bubble over and kind of look like a little mushroom. That's surface tension. The water is pulling itself back in due to those hydrogen bonds. And that's cohesion. That's all cohesion, right? Water droplets on a leaf, that's all cohesion as well. Adhesion is water sticking to anything besides itself. Like if you're driving in a car and you are in a rainstorm and the water's kind of stuck to the window, that's because there are actually polar molecules in the glass. So as long as that material contains polar molecules, water will still want to stick to it. So usually this is water glass, but really anything else that water sticks to besides itself could serve as the other in this example. So water sticking to something else is adhesion. If you have a test tube, you can see this pretty easily. Water will stick to the sides of the test tube, and you get this meniscus. You get this curved kind of line. And that's why you kind of always measure at the bottom of that meniscus, because that's kind of the true water level. The water being pulled up the sides is not actually where the water level is, right? If these tubes are small enough, test tubes are kind of wide, but like if you have plant roots, then you can actually have water move all the way up to the top of the plant. That's actually how plants work. That's how leaves get water. That's called capillary action. That's called capillary action. And the forces of adhesion and cohesion are strong enough to where forces like gravity aren't strong enough to pull it back down. Gravity is pretty weak, so it's more or less easy to overcome, and it actually does happen for capillary action. Here's just another example. By the way, the thinner the tube, the easier it is for the forces of adhesion and cohesion to overcome gravity. That's why the thinner the tube, the higher the water will go. I don't know why it just made this mark right here. Ignore that mark. This is also why you can color flowers, because capillary action pulls the water up the stem via cohesion and adhesion, and then you can get these nice colors. All right, water floats when it's a solid. So ice will float. This allows organisms to actually evolve and live and survive underneath it. Life would not have evolved if water sank when it froze. If you have like liquid methane, like some planets and moons have liquid methane lakes rather than liquid water lakes. I mean, the chemistry is a little bit different, but the take-home point is that if water sunk when it froze, life probably would not have evolved in a watery world, if at all. So ice floats. Because water is polar, and because most things are polar, really the only things that aren't are like lipids and fats, most things are going to want to dissolve in water. So we call water the universal solvent. A good example of this is, salt or sugar. If you drop those in water, they're going to get pulled apart really easily and they dissolve in that. And again, the reason why water dissolves so many things is because, again, it is a polar molecule. The fact that it's polar really underlies all of these properties. Here it is again, because of its polarity. All right, last of the main properties here, water has a high heat of vaporization. What does that mean? It means that it takes a lot of energy for liquid water to become a gas. And because it takes a lot of energy to do that, it absorbs quite a lot of energy in the process. And this is why evaporation and sweating is so good at cooling you down, right? Because as it converts from a liquid to a gas, it's removing all of that heat with it, and it helps your body cool off. And in fact, when we did our homeostasis Padlet, a lot of you told me that body temperature is one thing that has to be constant in a warm-blooded organism, and this is a mechanism to maintain homeostasis for body temperature. The dog is here because dogs don't have sweat glands and they can't sweat, so they pant. So if your dog is panting, they're cooling themselves off because that is where the water evaporates from. So let your dog pant. They are cooling down. All right. I'm going to go ahead and skip this really quick. It's just a couple images. Yeah, we'll skip that. Last little bit here and then we're done. pH. So pH is a measure of how acidic or how basic something is. That's kind of the base definition. The more chemical definition is it's technically how many hydrogen ions you have, right? If you notice, if you take water and you break it into its components, you get a hydrogen ion and an OH. It's called a hydroxide, but we can just call it OH, an OH group here. What we care about is how many hydrogens you have. The more hydrogens you have in water, the more acidic it is, right? The less hydrogens you have in water, or in a solution of water, the less acidic it is. So here's our pH scale. A pH of 7 is neutral. And we're not going to do pH calculations too much, but that's more or less fresh water. Fresh water is technically slightly acidic. It's a little bit in this diagram to the left. It's about 6.8. But you can just consider 7 to be water, regular old water. Things that have a higher concentration of hydrogen ions include coffee, which is why it's acidic. It's also why it can damage your teeth. Your fruit juices, your citrus juices. So any kind of citrus juice, including orange juice, is acidic. Make sure you brush your teeth after you drink orange juice. Not immediately after, or you can even damage your enamel, but you do want to clean your teeth after this stuff. Soda is acidic. Stomach acid, hydrochloric acid in your stomach has a pH of 2. And actually battery acid in the battery of your car can have a pH below 1. Right? Things that have fewer hydrogen ions are usually cleaning solutions in your everyday experience. So ammonia, lye is used for soap. Salt water is actually a little bit basic. But that's just kind of an overview of the pH scale. Alkalinity is a synonym for basic. They mean the same thing. So you can go around calling people alkaline and they won't know you're insulting them. Don't actually do that. All right, so here's just another view of the same thing. Here we go. Basic is alkaline. The only other thing I want to add is that every time you go from one pH to the next, so one level to the next, you actually get 10 times more basic or more acidic. So if something has a pH of 4, it's 10 times more acidic. Less acidic than something with a pH of 3, right? Something with a pH of 2 is 10 times more acidic than something with a pH of 3. Something with a pH of 1 is 10 times more acidic than something with a pH of 2. And you can do multiples. So if you have something with a pH of 3 compared to something with a pH of 1, the thing with a pH of 1 is 100 times more acidic, 10 times 10, right? And vice versa. If you go from 7 to 8, you've gotten 10 times less acidic. If you've gone from 8 to 10, you've gotten 100 times less acidic, right? So that's just some of the pH scale. And we'll talk about this when I see you guys next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. Bye-bye.